All right. Well, here we are with day 3. And so on behalf of the Michigan Council for the Social Studies, I want to welcome you all. My name is Mary Burleson, and this is the 3rd day of our virtual conference, Cultivating Collaboration in Changing Times. We hope that you all find some amazing things to take away today from all of our sessions. And we're so excited to have you here. Um, all right. So there's our schedule on the side there. And in just a few minutes, we'll be inviting our 3rd keynote speaker to the stage, Dr. Michael Rice, who is our state superintendent. But first, we have a couple of conference etiquette items to go over. All right. So at the end of each session, if you could please take the session survey, we would really appreciate it. These are individualized for each session, and the results will be shared with the presenters. You'll find the survey down at the bottom of each session description in both the conference app and the web platform. So if you look right here, it says surveys, and that's where you'll click on session survey. And fun fact, you can also check in up here, which is pretty cool. To catch a session recap later, come back to the session page in a few days. We have a lot of our sessions already up from Monday and Tuesday, which is amazing. And you'll have access to the entire conference's worth of learning for several months after the conference has ended. This is a great way to catch extra sessions that you might not have been able to have watched live because you were in another session or just couldn't make it. So also another important thing to note is that we have sketch credits available for all sessions that you attend live. There are up to 10 available for this entire conference. In order to earn those credits, you will have to fill out the Sketch Google survey form located in the Crowd Compass app for each session you attend. This will be confirmed by attendance logs from Zoom. So make sure to sign into the chat log for each session with your full name, so including your first and last name. If you don't fill out the form at the end of the session that you attend, you will be unable to earn credit. So make sure you put in that chat every time your name, and then fill out that form at both the 5:40 and the 6:40 session today. Oops, sorry about that. While attending the session, please try to keep your microphones muted unless the speaker is asked for feedback or asked you to participate. This will help with give the presenters the floor and help with less interruptions. As a reminder, we have a message from our new state social studies consultant at Michigan Department of Education, Scott Koenig. Oh, here he comes right now, actually, on our website. So we invite all of you to please visit mcssmi.org and view Scott's message to the social studies community. We're really excited to have him join us. And finally, if at any point you're having trouble with the conference app or web platform accessing the sessions, go ahead and reach out to me. My email is mburleson, BURLESON @mcssmi.org. I'll throw it up in the chat, or you can also text me and I'll put my phone number in the chat as well. And I'll do my best to help you get back up and running. All right, before we turn it over to Dr. Rice, I'd like to give our sponsor, the Dbq Project, a moment to share with us. So please welcome Molly Kent.
Thanks, Mary. I just need a minute to be able to share my screen, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure, I'll make you co-host.
I appreciate it. All right. Well, educators, starting with questions. We're not doing that. Here we go. All right. Good afternoon, educators. And I hope you are enjoying the conference and you are doing well personally and professionally. As Mary said, I'm Amali Kent, with the DBQ Project. And I'm here just to give you a quick preview of some of the new things that's going on with us. And when I looked at the names of who is attending this week, it's a lot of familiar names and friendly faces. So if you're new to DBQ Project and you're not sure about what we do, please check out our website at dbqproject.com, as well as our sponsor page on the conference app. There's a lot of resources for you to kind of just start digging into what we do. But for those of you who we've had the privilege to work with quite closely, you know we're all about helping our kids become critical thinkers, better writers, and how we tackle history and literacy simultaneously. So as I mentioned, I just want to take a few minutes, since so many of you are familiar with what we do, just to share what's new. So 4 quick items. First and foremost, we now have self-paced professional development in addition to our virtual and in-person options. PD has been so challenging with sub shortages and things like that. So if it's been a while since you've been to a training or you have new teachers, feel free to take advantage of our self-paced PD. It's absolutely free. You get a certificate at the end when you complete it. It's about 5 to 6 hours long. And we have courses for high school, middle school, as well as elementary. And again, if you need any information about that, I'll share my contact information at the end. So yeah, professional PD, self-paced PD. Second, we also have our materials now available in Spanish, in print as well as digital. And if you are using DBQ Online, your kids can now toggle back and forth between the 2 languages. So that's new. And speaking of DBQ Online, for those of you who are administrators in the audience, I want to let you know that DBQ Online now has an admin portal as well, where in addition to looking at your teacher usage, like what kind of instructional choices they're making in their classroom with our materials, you now have the ability to push to your teachers, even by grade level, common assessments, marked up lessons, rubrics, basically whatever you want to do with our resources marked up. So that's just a new tool that's available to those of you who are administrators, okay? And then last but not least, maybe the most exciting for many of you in the audience, we have 2 new binders that are fresh off the press. The last couple of years, we had our new elementary binders as well as our econ. But then the last couple of years, we've been writing our new US material. So if you're looking at the screen, you can see that there is a second US Volume 1 binder now that's perfect for 8th grade. And then US Volume 2, that's ideal for high school. And the cutoff is still the same. It's right around that Civil War Reconstruction era. Our lessons still take that same format, that 6-step method that you all like so much, but we tried to include some new topics that we didn't include the first time around, like the Trail of Tears or 9/11 or the Tulsa Race Massacre, just new topics. So that's just a little bit of what's new with us. Mary, thank you for you and the MCSS for giving us this time to present. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And everyone have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Amali. I really appreciate having you here. And I hope that at our next conference in person, you all have a minute to meet with Amali because she is absolutely amazing. All right. So without further ado, I will introduce Dr. Michael Rice, our state superintendent. Dr. Rice was appointed Michigan's 44th Superintendent of Public Instruction by Michigan State Board of Education in May of 2019. He came to the Michigan Department of Education after serving 17 years as a local district superintendent, most recently at Kalamazoo Public Schools, where he started full-day pre-kindergarten and quintupled the number of full-day kindergarten students, led the improvement in student achievement in reading, writing, math, advanced placement, participation, and successful graduation rates. Prior to serving as Kalamazoo superintendent, Dr. Rice served 5 years as superintendent of the Clifton, New Jersey public schools. Dr. Rice began his career in public education in the Washington, D.C. public school districts, where he taught high school French and founded and coached an award-winning speech and debate program. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome to the stage Dr. Michael Rice. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. Good to be with fellow educators. Good to be with Ms. Burleson, my younger daughter's social studies teacher. Feels a little bit like old home week in that regard. It is a pleasure to be here and to speak with you. Let me see if my screen is working. Very good. So I want to thank the council for its efforts to promote diversity and inclusion in our kids' social studies education. I want to thank council and MDE staff for work on today's event. I'd like to begin the presentation by centering you in the year of the bicentennial. This was 1976. This was my 8th grade year. And a group of friends and I did a History Day presentation, History Day competition presentation on Paul Revere's ride in 1775. And it struck me at the time that there were so many aspects of history about which I had been unaware, about which many people seemed to be unaware. How did it become Paul Revere's ride in 1775 to warn that the British were coming? What about Charles Dawes? What about Dr. Samuel Prescott? Who knew about these other two? How did they become subordinated in history? How did Paul Revere become elevated in history? This first experience with thinking about history somewhat kaleidoscopically gave rise to a number of important questions. Who makes or shapes history? Who writes history? And in typical middle school boy fashion, should we care about any of this? So here's the agenda for my presentation today: the power of collaboration, the importance of comprehensive history instruction, and then by extension, a call to action. We collectively, history teachers, social studies teachers more broadly, historians in a wide range of communities and education organizations need to collaborate, need to partner on presenting the widest range of history instruction to our children. Our children are diverse, our history is diverse, it's full of movements, it's full of themes, it's full of peoples, and it's critical that we teach the broadest range of this history. Teaching thematic history is often more engaging than the teaching of chronological history. It's not that you ignore the chronological, but that you weave in the thematic, giving children more cognitive pegs on which to hold the information. Teaching the full breadth of US and world history helps prepare our young people for a diverse world. When I say teaching the full breadth of history, I'm literally talking about teaching it all, subject to developmental appropriateness and, of course, time constraints. All major movements, themes, and peoples should be taught. We should not avoid or otherwise circumvent difficult or challenging subjects such as race, racism, xenophobia, and sexism. Rather, we should lean into these difficult topics as they are so much a part of our history in this country and also across the world. In an era of curriculum narrowing, we should be about curriculum expanding. In an era of book banning, we need to be about book sharing. Educators need to do so in partnership with one another. There are a tremendous number of people outside of schools that would limit what we do in schools. And it really is important and incumbent upon us to protect and defend not simply the right, but the responsibility of educators, professional educators, to share broadly and responsibly with young people. So I want to give you a little bit of example of this notion of comprehensive history instruction, or sort of a series of embedded examples in the next few minutes, and talk a little bit about what I learned and what some of you may have learned coming up, what many people learned coming up. And I think the sort of, if you will, the other part of the story behind the story in so many cases. So the Emancipation Proclamation, many of us would say, and I so regret that we're not in person today. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you virtually, but doing this in person would have been a kick, because it would have led to a lot more engagement, I think. But let's see what we can get with you reflecting to yourself. So the Emancipation Proclamation, I think virtually everyone is aware, freed the slaves. But what does that exactly mean? So President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation January 1st, 1863, after reflecting upon this idea for the better part of the summer before. It was pretty much shaped up by September, and then signed January 1st, 1863. And the proclamation declares that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are, and henceforward shall be free. But was that in fact true? The reality was that the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the states of the Confederacy. It did not free slaves in the border states, and it did not free slaves, notwithstanding the language of the proclamation, did not free slaves beyond the duration of the war. Lincoln himself had tremendous misgivings about his ability to extend this proclamation beyond the extent of the war. So the Emancipation Proclamation, notwithstanding the power of the proclamation, not simply for the war, but the symbolism and the morality of the act, was not an enduring act. It was a constrained act. It was constrained geographically. It was constrained temporally. What it actually ended slavery? It was the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment abolishes slavery in the United States. It's passed by Congress right before the war ends in January of 1865. It's ratified by the states, and ultimately becomes the 13th Amendment of the US Constitution, December 6th, 1865. 13th Amendment is the first of the Civil War amendments, which is a quirky term when you think about the fact that none of the Civil War amendments were actually ratified during the Civil War. They were all ratified after the Civil War. But what about the 14th Amendment? Because one imagines that when slavery ends, full citizenship ensues, but that's in fact not actually what took place. In fact, it wasn't until the 14th Amendment that Blacks were granted citizenship. 14th Amendment says in pertinent part, not in full, but in pertinent part, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. In other words, there was a period of time in our nation's history where Blacks were liberated on the one hand, but they were strictly speaking not considered citizens. We're going to come back to that reflection in a moment. So once made citizens, of course, they were able to vote, right? The answer is not necessarily. It would be the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution that gave Blacks, and more specifically, Black men, the right to vote. The 15th Amendment reads, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 15th Amendment was ratified by the states February 3rd, 1870. 50 years later, the 19th Amendment is ratified, becomes part of the US Constitution as a result. 19th Amendment was spearheaded by people like Susan B. Anthony, who fought for many years for this, and many, many others. Many did not live to see the 19th Amendment effectuate. The 19th Amendment, of course, which gave women the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony famously wrote, "Cautious, careful people, always casting about, trying to preserve their reputation and social standing, can never bring about a reform. Those who are really in earnest must be willing to be anything or nothing in the world's estimation." The 19th Amendment legally guarantees American women the right to vote, ratified on August 18th, 1920. Reflect upon that trajectory, if you will. Blacks in 1865 are no longer enslaved, but they are not quite citizens. Not according to the US Constitution. They don't become citizens until 1868, at least not in the Deep South, and don't have the right to vote across the country until 1870. In 1870, with the passage of the 15th Amendment, it would be Black men that gained the right to vote. Black women, and indeed most white women, did not have the right to vote until 1920. Now, it is true that in certain states, women had the right to vote, but broadly writ across the country, it wasn't until the 19th Amendment that women gained the right to vote. You'll notice the progression here, and it is a substantial progression, and it's a noteworthy progression for young people to see. It's noteworthy that our young people see that the country is not static, that it can be improved, and we have a structure in our country, the US Constitution, with Article 5, which countenances, which notes how to make amendments to itself. We have a way to progress through constitutional amendment. So what about the Voting Rights Act of 1965? The Voting Rights Act of 1965 takes place 45 years after the 19th Amendment. It takes place almost a century after the 15th Amendment. In other words, almost a century after the 15th Amendment grants the right to vote to, for all intents and purposes, men of color. Voting Rights Act of 1965 is passed by the US Congress, signed into law by Lyndon Johnson. It's meant to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote as guaranteed under the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution. So what exactly does this mean? What this means is that not only can rights be conferred in our country, but rights can be lost in our country. They can be suspended, they can be pushed aside, and they have to be regained in our country. That's not just my opinion, although it is my opinion. That's the history of our country. Go back in time, if you would, to Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott, a slave who escapes ostensibly to freedom, is captured, petitions the court, and says, look, I had arrived in liberty. I should have freedom in perpetuity. And the US Supreme Court decision by the Chief Justice at the time determined that because Blacks were not citizens in 1857, that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And I put that in quotation marks to show you the jarring language, the ugly, jarring, racist language of the time. It would take 8 more years from 1857 to abolish slavery. It would take 11 more years to institute citizenship for Blacks. It would take 13 more years to grant the right to vote, irrespective of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. More horrifyingly, it would take almost a century more. It would take more than a century before Blacks had access to full citizenship. Reflect upon the progress of a nation, the regression of, and then the progress again of a nation. The teaching to young people of progress, the teaching of the the moments where we have in some ways regressed as a nation, and then we have reprogressed as a nation. So a couple of other examples of the same sort of progression. So Plessy versus Ferguson, as a number of you know, as most of you know, declared separate but equal public accommodations constitutional in 1896, an 8-1 US Supreme Court decision. It would be 58 years later before Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education and 4 companion cases before the court unanimously overturned Plessy and declared separate but equal accommodations unconstitutional. Nonetheless, notwithstanding the US Supreme Court's decision in Brown declaring unconstitutional separate but equal facilities, it would require the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to firmly ban discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, including discrimination in public accommodations. After Brown, you can still see separate but equal beaches, separate but equal bathrooms, separate but equal water fountains, the inability of Blacks to eat at restaurants, to shop in particular commercial establishments, and the like. Our belief in the department, and more broadly, our belief with a large number of educational organizations across the state, is that our children deserve to learn about the full breadth of US and world history, including the most difficult and searing topics. As educators, we believe we have the responsibility to teach them about these important topics, not to duck, not to demur, not to deflect, but to lean into these topics. They are important. Our young people are thinking about them. They are questioning us about them, and we have the right and the responsibility to weigh in on these very, very challenging topics. Nothing in this effort is meant to denigrate the country. Nothing in this effort is meant to denigrate any other country. It's simply to acknowledge the marbled history, not simply of our country, but of the world. We as a nation are a work in progress. We've made far more progress than not. We've come a long way. We have a ways to go. And I don't think that that is an epiphany for most of our students, certainly not for our older students. So we also need to teach thematically. It's important to not simply to teach history, not simply chronologically, but also to reflect upon the teaching thematically, the history of movements, themes, and people, as I mentioned before. Many of you are already teaching about historical movements, themes, and people in your daily work. If you are, keep on keeping on. We want to help you in that regard. This is the sort of teaching that's often more interesting and engaging to kids. It's more likely to be remembered. It's more likely to engender additional research and reading on the part of our young people. And more importantly, it's likely to inspire our children to become lifelong learners in their lives and their careers. So we've begun a comprehensive history instruction webinar series in the state. We began it last week. We're hosting this series of webinars to assist Michigan educators with teaching history more fully. These presentations will provide you with additional tools to drive up your knowledge of different themes, movements, and people. Our view is that as teacher knowledge increases, so too does the ability of teachers to inspire and increase the knowledge of our young people. The first webinar series is taking place now, began last Wednesday. It continued just an hour and a half ago. Actually, it just ended 30 minutes ago. And then next week on April 27th, Holocaust education series. The second is on the history of Indigenous peoples. It will take place June 29th. Next year, we hope to have a series of series, if you will, a host of different series on the civil rights movement, on Asian American immigration and citizenship. And again, we hope on several other topics as well. A large number of organizations and a growing number of organizations have helped us in standing up this series, and we hope will help us as we walk the walk and feather out this series. The Michigan Council for Social Studies, Michigan Council for History Education, the MEA, AFT Michigan, MEMSPA, MASSP, MASA, Middle Cities, MAISA, MAME, the Library of Michigan, Michigan Library Association, the Michigan Academic Library Association, and many more to come. The reality is that we have a lot of work to do in concert with one another, educators. The fact of the matter is that public education is very much a battleground. It's very much under siege, and there are a whole lot of people who haven't trained and studied to be educators who want to weigh in on what we should teach and whether we should teach particular subjects. I would argue this is a place where educators really need to make their voices heard, and who better to make their voices heard than social studies teachers. And I'm reminded of Frederick Douglass, who famously said, "Those who profess to cherish freedom yet deprecate agitation want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters." And he continues, and I paraphrase in somewhat different language than he used in the 1850s. "People may not get all they pay for in this world, but they must certainly pay for all they get." You make an omelet, you're going to have to crack a few eggs. You want to build a better world, you're going to have to fight to build a better world. And the reality is that every one of the salient events that I mentioned in the last several minutes, the creation of the Emancipation Proclamation, the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the passage of the 19th Amendment, the movement toward Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, which was 30 years or almost 30 years in the making, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These were long-standing efforts to make a more perfect union. And who better to fight the good fight in this regard than social studies and history teachers who have studied our history, who are teaching our history, and who have a lot to share with our young people in that regard. I wish you well. I hope you keep fighting the good fight. I appreciate you. I look forward to working alongside of you to build better public schools for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Rice. We really appreciate you today and being here for us today and for that wonderful message. Um, did you want to take any questions today, or I don't
Sure,
know
I'm
if you
happy
have
to.
time?
Yep.
So if anybody'd like to ask a question or anything, you want to go ahead and raise your hand, virtual hand, or unmute.
There are a couple of comments in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely check out the chat. I know that Mary, you shared something, and Elaine will send it as well. Oh, Elaine's question. What is your opinion, Dr. Rice, about critical race theory for Michigan curriculum? Many states passed legislation to move away from exploration and engaged discussion on critical race theory. So Elaine was wondering your opinion on that.
Yeah. So my opinion about critical race theory is, for the most part, we're not teaching critical race theory explicitly in pre-K 12. That it's a subject for teaching at the higher education level, university, graduate school, law school, and the like. I know that there are a number of people that read critical race theory who are, pre-K 12 teachers. They may use it to inform their lens, the way others may use other texts to inform their lens. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in general, my feeling is that it's not explicitly taught. It ought not to be explicitly taught, and that we can get at some of the same clarity, accuracy, truthfulness, and relevance of events of the past and present through comprehensive history instruction.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Más preguntas? Plus de questions? Español? Français? Can't give them away.
Thank you for testing my Spanish lingo today. I appreciate that one.
Yes, Dr. Rice, if I may have a question, I have a
Yep.
question. How do you see technology impacting education post-pandemic? I know we're going back into the classrooms. What will we embrace going forward? What should we embrace? What should we leave behind? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think the power of technology is we're now able to get into corners of the world that for years, at best, we could only read about. We could read about or go to, but not too many people are going to go to Dachau or Auschwitz or. We could read about, for the most part, not too many people are going to be able to visit. But the power of technology is we can beam in, we can take a virtual tour of places, so we can see so much. And you have to be very careful about what you show young people, and because you don't want them to be inadvertently exposed to secondary trauma. But by the same token, what powerful images, minimally simply the liberation of the camps in 1945 and the condition of camp survivors at the time. It doesn't take a particularly vivid imagination to imagine if these were the survivors, what happened to 12 million others, 6 million Jews and 6 million non-Jews in the so-called camps. So the power of technology is you're able to bring it home to young people so much more quickly, so much more efficiently, so much more powerfully. The challenge, though, is our kids have grown up in this technological world, and so they expect so much more of us as teachers than perhaps we expected of our teachers back in the day, because they live in a world that's faster paced, that has colors and sounds and movement and so some of the same things that we would call tools are also in a fashion our competition as well. And so we have to sort of make peace with the competition in a fashion and benefit as much as we can from the technology, recognizing that we're being asked to up our game because so many young people are spending time on technology outside of classrooms and aren't going to be satisfied with the same lectures that perhaps we got back in the day.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer. Thank you. I'll
Okay.
embrace that as well.
Other questions? I'm trying, Ms. Burleson.
Gotta leave that teacher wait time.
And I will the teacher wait time. And you know, if I were in person, I'd say I can see a question on your face, but it's hard to see questions on the faces in 2 dimensions. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope you have a great conference. Keep on fighting the good fight. Looking forward to working with you on these important themes. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And remember that you can leave a question in the chat, or, I'm sure connect with Dr. Rice later if you wanted to talk to him on the side. So I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. But yeah, thank you again for being here. It is always a pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Rice. All right, so our next sessions start at 5:40. And so before the next session, don't forget to fill out the Keynote session survey. So right where you logged in to the Keynote, where you click to join here in the Crowd Compass app, there is at the bottom a link for the survey. So go ahead and fill that out. And also don't forget to fill out your sketch form. And if you didn't do so at the beginning, please put your name in the chat so we know that you attended today. I will hang out here for a few minutes if anybody has any individual questions, but otherwise we'll see you at 5:40 for your next session. Thank you guys.